Good afternoon. My name is Mark Shafer. I'm speaking from the Carnegie Historical Museum in Fairfield, Iowa, and today's October 15th. I almost said 1999. It's that plus one, 2000. I'm really tickled to see this many people here tonight, or this afternoon, because with the Forest Crafts Festival and it being a nice day, I figured it'd be me and the camera and maybe Dot Hellcamp, and that'd be it. But it's nice to have a crowd. The program this afternoon is focusing on the Antiquities collection at the museum here, specifically the things in Case 12. It's going to be kind of a stop and start program because we have to move things to get them on camera adequately and to their best advantage. But it's going to be basically in two parts. First, I'm going to talk about the men who made the collection possible, and then I'll talk about the collection itself. I think talking about these two individuals is going to give a little life to these otherwise interesting but far away pieces. I mean, ancient Rome and Etruria are about as far removed from early Fairfield as you can get, so this will tie everything in together. The first man I'm going to talk about is Samuel Hawkins Marshall Byers, known as Major S.H.M. Byers. I'm not sure why they called him a major, because I don't think he actually gained that rank during the Civil War. But over a period of time, somehow, maybe it's like Colonel Sanders with the Kentucky, who knows. Anyway, this is Major Byers right here. I found that picture in the 1932 issue of the Palimpsest, the November issue actually, and I want to thank the librarian Carol, the Special Collections resource, what do you call her? Carol, the person that does research for you. Anyway, she found it for me, and there were two articles, one about him that was called With Sword, and then the next one was called And Pen. So he was a Civil War hero, and a poet, and author, and a diplomat, and we'll get to all that. But I'm going to run down his life fairly quickly and give you some idea of the richness of his life experience, and really how fortunate we are and how odd it is that we have this stuff. Anyway, he was born the 23rd of July, 1838 in Pennsylvania. His father was a bricklayer. They moved to Iowa in 1851 and ultimately settled in Oskaloosa in 1853. So he's not too far from us in terms of geographic location. His mother's maiden name was Marshall, and she was a grandniece of Chief Justice John Marshall. So there must have been a little bit of distinguished lineage in his background. In 1860, he went south to Tennessee to a plantation on a horse buying expedition with his father. Now, I don't know if he was selling horses or if they were buying horses. It doesn't really matter. But at that time, he was impressed by the singing of the slaves in the cabins at night. But he also saw the darker side of slavery in that he witnessed some rather brutal beatings of an elderly household servant and a young black man who was not cooperating, I guess. 100 lashes on his bare back. So pretty nasty stuff on the verge of the Civil War. And the overseer that did the beatings, I mean, it was almost like a Simon Legree out of Gone with the Wind. He made fun of the Byerses for being sickened by this sight, that, if the man said, well, if I were upset by this sort of thing, I'd go north too. So it was just very, very cynical, cold-hearted man, and made a big impression on Byers, who signed up to join the Northern Forces on June 24th, 1861, and he was assigned to Company B of the 5th Iowa Infantry at Newton. Now, why he signed up at Newton and not at Oskaloosa, I don't know, but that's where it happened. Eventually, he was promoted to quartermaster sergeant, and he saw action at the Vicksburg campaign and then also at Shiloh. He was captured in late 1863 and spent 7 months in Libby Prison, which I think is about as infamous as Andersonville, as I recall. This was in Richmond. It was an old tobacco barn that he was housed in. 3 stories with no windows. It was very cold, very drafty. And the only reason he had a blanket was because he grabbed one as he was taken prisoner from a dead soldier that was lying on the field. At one point during his incarceration there, a battalion of Maryland soldiers were marching by, and they were singing "Maryland, My Maryland" to the tune of what is it, Der Tannenbaum? Yeah, Der Tannenbaum. And this kind of kept in the back of his mind, and we'll find out what he used that for later. In the summer of 1864, he was transferred to Macon, Georgia, and there it was as hot as it had been cold in Richmond. And over a period of time, he traded, and I didn't say what he traded, but he was able to finagle a Confederate uniform out of one of the guards. And let's see, how did he do this? I tell you, I researched my tail off on this program. Usually I get up here, just open my mouth and spew. But this stuff I really had to work for. But it's been interesting. He got the uniform, and he walked out on July 15th and wandered around pretending to look for his regiment. Well, eventually they caught him again, and he was going to be shot, but they lost the papers, and so he just went back to prison and squeaked by on that one. Then in August of '64, he was transferred to Charleston and then to Columbia, South Carolina, because there'd been a yellow fever epidemic in Charleston. Then in November 1864, he and a comrade were sent out into these piney woods that surrounded the prison encampment for wood, and the two of them just conveniently disappeared. And of course, they got caught again. And this time they were housed in this former lunatic asylum. It was a little more secure than just this fenced enclosure. But news of Sherman's advances were smuggled into the prison. A friendly slave would put newspapers inside of loaves of bread, and that's how the prisoners would get news of the outside world. And let's see, that was in December of 1864 that he wrote his poem, Sherman's March to the Sea. And a comrade in the prison was a composer and put it to music. And they had a glee club in the prison, and they could sing northern songs as long as they balanced them with good southern songs. Well, they sang this and became very popular in the prison. And then there was a prisoner exchange, and an officer of some, I think it was a lieutenant of some sort, smuggled out a copy of the song and the music inside of his wooden leg, and that's how it got to the North and became a hit song. Byers became very famous, and the commander of the prison was so impressed that he gave Byers quarters inside the prison hospital, so he had a bed to sleep in. And this proved to be a real advantage, because when Sherman did come through, he and another buddy hid under the roof of the porch somehow, and missed being carted off to another prison farther south along with the other inmates. Anyway, word got out to General Sherman that the composer of Sherman's March to the Sea was in town, and they located him, and he was invited to dinner. And he was pretty ragged, I guess, so they had to scrounge up a uniform for him so he was presentable. But Sherman took a liking to him and invited him to be a member of his staff, and actually gave him the job of taking news of the victory after they took Atlanta. Took that news, the dispatches, to General Grant and then to Lincoln. He got to Washington, D.C., I think, not until March, just a few weeks before Lincoln was shot. I believe that was April 10th that he was shot. But he got to Washington with these dispatches after the war had actually ended. Let me see if I'm losing myself. Oh, the slave that gave him food, Edward Edwards, later had a book dedicated to him that Byers wrote, entitled What I Saw in Dixie, and that was published in 1868, and that was one of several books of history and poetry, and even some religious. I think there was the Layman's Life of Jesus, published in 1912, that he wrote. So on February 17th, 1865, General Sherman stopped his march to congratulate Byers and invite him to dinner. Then in March of 1865, March 3rd, the article said the Army celebrated with wine and song. And 12 generals got together and sang Sherman's March to the Sea. And General John Logan, right here in this big photograph from the museum collection, played the violin. And we'll get another tie-in with him in just a minute. And like I said, Byers was dispatched with the news to Grant and Lincoln of Sherman's success. And then nobody's sure what he did right after the war, but in 1869 until 1884, he served as U.S. Consul in Zurich, Switzerland. And that's why there's the case of Swiss stuff out in the other room. I've always wondered what the heck that Swiss lake dweller junk was doing here. I mean, not junk, you know, those artifacts were doing here. Because they were kind of just odd to have in this community. But he became kind of an expert on the lake dwellers, and in fact, an article that he wrote for Harper's magazine was published in 1890, in February of 1890. And he wrote several books, travel books and history books about the people of Switzerland. In 1885, however, he was replaced by a Democrat. I can't remember who was president that year, Dr. Tree, after Garfield. Garfield was shot, and then Chester Arthur, I think.
No, the only Democrat in that era would be Cleveland.
Maybe that was it then. He must have been replaced by Cleveland. But then in 1891, he got his consulate back in Switzerland, and this time he was consul general. Then in 1893, he returned to Des Moines, and in 1897, he wrote the Song of Iowa, and that's the one that's...
You asked what band I love?
That's right. And you know what? I could have sworn that I had... Oh, here it is. I have the lyrics to the Sherman's March to the Sea. I won't read all of it, but it starts out, basically he imagined what the camp would be like and what Army life would have been like under Sherman. He says, "Our campfires shone bright on the mountains that frowned on the river below, while we stood by our guns in the morning and eagerly watched for the foe. When a rider came out from the darkness that hung over mountain and tree and shouted, 'Boys up and be ready, for Sherman will march to the sea.'" And there are like 5 or 6 stanzas to that poem. Now, we know why we have the Swiss artifacts in the museum, but we don't know why we have the Italian, Roman, and Etruscan things. He served in the consulate in Rome, in Italy, in the late 1890s for about a year and a half, 2 years. It didn't say exactly. So that's how he amassed these things at that time. Now, I don't know how it is that he became acquainted with James Wilson, but Wilson was congressman and then senator from Fairfield. And I just assume they got to know each other one way or another. Byers, being from Oskaloosa, is not that far from Fairfield, so they must have had some common connections that they got to know each other. These were collected in 1890, and then Wilson donated them in 1916 to the library. I assume maybe he had them in his home. I got the impression from this 1932 article that Byers may have still been alive. It didn't speak of a death date, and it talked about his son being a disappointment, whatever that was supposed to mean. But at the time the article was written in 1932, he lived in Los Angeles and wrote books on the Spanish settlements there and some of the missions and so forth. So he had broad-ranging, far-ranging interests, and was, like I say, published some books of poetry, and was quite a Renaissance man, I guess you would say. Now, the next person in this puzzle is James F. Wilson. And if you want to see what he looked like as an older man, go downstairs in the lobby of the Carnegie building here. But here he is with the impeachment committee for the U.S. House of Representatives. The impeachment of Andrew Johnson, which was, what, 1867? And I'll talk about a few of these men while I'm thinking of it, because you never know if I'll remember later. Okay, here's James Wilson as a fairly young man, and I couldn't find a birth date for him. Susan Welty's book of Fairfield talks about him as being an up-and-coming young lawyer in 1850. So let's suppose he was born, say, 1820 or so, 1825. It's hard to say. This is Benjamin Butler, and I'd better get my notes to make sure I get this right. Benjamin Franklin Butler, an extremely cranky individual, as I recall. Oh, here we are. He was born in 1818 and died in 1893. He was a general during the Civil War, and it was the one that took New Orleans, and then was military governor, and extremely unpopular with the South. He was a radical Republican in the U.S. Congress from 1867 to 75, and I believe he was for the impeachment. Am I right, Dr. Tree? Mm-hmm. Now, was he connected with the Boss Tweed ring later?
I don't know that he was.
Okay, then I won't. I'm just seeing some of these.
Because he was a corruptionist.
Okay. A radical Republican corruptionist. Not a good thing to say in an election year, right? But he just looks, I mean, just look at him. He looks like he's oily and
What
mean-spirited.
he did in New Orleans, that you mentioned, and so
Yeah.
action of Tweed would be possible, I think.
But it seems like I remember some of Tweed's, those Thomas Nast cartoons. It seems like I recognize his portrait as part of the Tweed ring. And at a later program, I'll verify that or not. Anyway, cranky man. John A. Logan, who I'd pointed out earlier with the big walrus mustache, that's the man for whom Logan School and now Logan Apartments was named. He was born in 1826 and died in 1886. He was a Union general at Vicksburg and Atlanta. He inaugurated Memorial Day in 1868, and I think Logan's orders was a speech that school children were required to memorize for many years. He was also one of the founders of the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, and was a U.S. congressman from 1867 to 71, and then again in the Senate from 1871 to 77, and then he died as a senator from 1879 and then dying in 1886. The last one I knew about, and the other man I didn't recognize, but Thaddeus Stevens. I mean, I think he was also a curmudgeon from way back, if I recall. He was born in 1792 and died in 1868, so he just got his impeachment vote in just under the gun, as it were. Another radical Republican from Pennsylvania, a prime mover in the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. He felt that Reconstruction should treat the South as conquered provinces, but he also proposed the 14th Amendment because he felt very strongly that the black population deserved a right to full citizenship. So those are some of the people that Wilson moved with. Yes?
Wilson, at that time, I believe, was a representative,
Right.
not a senator.
Right. He was a congressman in this.
Judiciary Committee and spoke so
Right.
eloquently.
Yes. In fact, my little note here says, this is the Committee on the Judiciary of the House of Representatives of the 40th Congress. And I kind of getting the cart before the horse on this one, but I just want to make sure I got all those men in, because the notes are in a different place than my other ones are. I mean, I had this all nice and tidy until about 6 o'clock last night. I thought, oh, this is too much. I'm just going to take what I've got and throw it together. All right. So we're going to talk about James Wilson and his particular interest with this building and the Fairfield Library. In 1853, he was an original library subscriber and director. In 1855, the Library Association, which had been established in 1853, offered a course of lectures, and James Wilson was on the committee and also one of the lecturers. It turns out they only had one person from the outside come in. Everybody else was local, like Charles Negus and people like that. His topic was entitled, "Who Are We?" I guess that's a good question. I wonder if he got it answered. And of course, his house is on South Main and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And I was going to look up the address, and I forgot to do that. Anybody know what block it's in? Is it 800s? 800 block on the east side of the road, if anybody doesn't know where it is. It has the kind of the big retaining wall around the tree along the street. Big white Greek Revival house. I'm sorry, what? Oh, good.
You know, it belonged to Parsons College for a number of years. Too.
Yes, and I think it's probably been remodeled more than any house in town. It gutted and re-gutted.
But they tell me the people that lived in the house said that the bathroom upstairs had no windows, but the wind blew right through the bathroom anyway. Heating bills were terrific.
There you go. Okay, so heating bills notwithstanding, I'm guessing that house was built in the 1850s, so this is about the same time as the library was founded. In 1856, he was elected to the State Constitutional Convention. They felt like they needed a revision in the state constitution because of the problems in Kansas. That was the time of, the slavery issue was so hot, and bloody Kansas was the big issue of the day, and I'm not sure how they amended the Constitution to meet that crisis, but it was felt that that was needed to be done. He defeated William Greer Coop, whose picture is in that far case to my right, with his wife, who was the father of William Coop, the first pioneer child born in the county. Coop was a Democrat. This was his last bid for public office, but Wilson only won by 75 votes. Wilson stood very firmly on the Bill of Rights with an emphasis on the slavery issue, which Coop had remained silent on. And so it was felt like, because Wilson was so strongly anti-slavery, that won the day for him. However, it was kind of a shaky margin. So in 1860, Wilson was the first to sign the charter of the Republican Wideawakes in Jefferson County. And this was a group whose purpose was to increase the majority, although an uneasy majority, that was anti-slavery in the county. It sounded like it was, because we're close to Missouri, I suppose it was kind of an even-Steven sort of a deal. Members were to participate in rallies and torchlight processions. They were to do vigilance duty on election day. Seems like a recent election we had some poll watchers that created a stir. And then escort duty. I imagine if there were abolitionist speakers or whatever that would come into town, they'd need an escort to protect them. I'm guessing, it wasn't really specified. In 1863, he was a congressman, in Washington, and he arranged, now this seems really strange to me, but he arranged for the most complete set of government records west of the Mississippi up to 1900 to be delivered to the Fairfield Library. Now, I don't know why we'd need government records, why that would be a big deal, but evidently it was important enough that the $40 for shipping was raised, even though it was during the war, was raised to get things brought over. And who knows if those government records still exist or not, but it must have been a really big deal at the time, but I can't imagine why it would be. In 1870, he co-founded the Jefferson County Coal Company with Dr. Hufford and Charles Slagle, on whose property the new library now stands. And I believe Slagle's portrait's also hanging in the library there. And then a man named George Atchison. And that's basically the Purley area. They had 300 acres, and by 1878 they employed 60 miners, and this was in response to the demand of the railroads for coal. The Chicago Rock Island went through Purley at that time. In 1874, he helped arouse interest in bringing Parsons College to Fairfield. There were 2 Presbyterian schools being established at that time. One in, is it Lenox, Iowa? Or was it Lenox College? I didn't write this down, but there was one in northern Iowa, and they wanted another one in southern Iowa. And Fairfield had not been in the running at the time, but the other 3 towns that had wanted the college didn't really meet the criteria of the Parsons will. And so Wilson helped get the Parsons family interested in Fairfield. And then in February of 1875, the Articles of Association were signed by Wilson and 24 others that were invited to do so by General Parsons, who became the first president. And his picture is not up there, but we have his artifacts and things here in the library. I guess his portrait's over there on the wall. It's a separate oil painting. In 1876, Wilson gave $1,000 to the Library Association. He was acting as a go-between for an unknown party, although it's likely that he himself was the donor. And in 1876, he built the Wilson Block, which is the series of buildings where Edward D. Jones is housed, and went around the corner to what was Seifert's at one time. And in 1891, he persuaded Andrew Carnegie to give $30,000 for the first Carnegie Library west of the Mississippi. And in January of 1892, the public announcement of Carnegie's gift was made. Senator Wilson gave the land on which this building sits, and made arrangement for the Smithsonian to donate many of the mounted birds specimens we have now. And of course, by this time he was a U.S. Senator. In March of 1893, the library was finished, including a museum and lecture room. And I believe that Wilson was very adamant that there would be a museum as part of the library. In 1893, Senator Wilson served on the committee to secure the model of the battleship Iowa that's out in the other room beside the elevator, which used to be in the lobby of the library for many years. And then in 1916, He donated the Etruscan and Roman collection, which we will now speak of after our little break. I've just discovered that I did clip some of the pieces of the Byers Song of Iowa. See yonder fields of tasseled corn, Iowa in Iowa, where plenty fills her golden horn, Iowa in Iowa. You ask what land I love the best, Iowa 'tis Iowa, the fairest state of all the West, Iowa, oh Iowa. S.H.M. Byers, The Song of Iowa. Okay, here we are back again. Now, as I said, this is going to be kind of a stop and go sort of a deal because we have a lot of pieces to talk about. We'll talk about two categories of the collection. First, we'll talk about the Etruscan pottery, and then we'll talk about some of the Roman, some of the Roman antiquities. Lots and lots of people say Etruscan. What's Etruscan? Well, Etruscan, the Etruscans were a people that lived in north and central Italy from the 10th or 11th century BC up until about the 3rd century BC when they had become completely Romanized. The 8th and 7th centuries BC, they were at the zenith of their power, and there were actually two Etruscans who sat on the throne of the city of Rome. They dominated Italy for 200 years. They were excellent navigators and traders. And to give you an idea of where Rome fits into this, Rome itself was founded in 753. I wanted to have you take a look at this Etruscan tomb painting here. I'll just read what I got off the internet. This is a nice summary of what their artwork looked like. Most examples of Etruscan painting come from excavated tombs, and this is an example of a tomb fresco, which depicts scenes of everyday life, mythology, and mortuary rites, typically in bright colors and a vigorous animated style. Scenes of feasting, dancing, swimming, fishing, and playing evoke a confident people who enjoyed life to the full, and who even in death depicted themselves in a joyous and festive manner. I was just at the Chicago Art Institute a couple of weeks ago, and they have a nice little selection of Etruscan artifacts, and some of their funerary portraits are among that collection. So if you're ever in Chicago and want to see more of the Etruscans, you can do so there. The University of Iowa Museum has a very nice collection of the black Bucchero pottery, and I think that's how you say it. Bucchero nero means black pottery, basically. And that's some of these pieces I have right here in front of me. The decline of their civilization in the shadow of Rome's expansion is reflected in their later art, which loses its original joie de vivre and becomes more somber. Their influences were from archaic Greece and the Middle East, and specifically the almond eyes. It's kind of the eyes, it's like an ancient Egyptian art or ancient archaic Greek art. The eye is drawn as if from the front, like a little football with a circle inside of it. That's very typical. And then this little picture here, you probably can't see it on camera, but it also has those almond eyes. And up until a few days ago, that picture was in the Swiss case of Dr. Byers' collection on a shelf that said Maya pottery, but I'm just pretty convinced that that's actually Etruscan. And that's all the information I have on it, because I haven't been able to find the accession card. But you can see there's a lot of incised decoration, and I don't know if that white accent would have been original to it, or if that was rubbed in by a later collector who wanted to be able to see the designs on the piece. I mean, it's just hard for me to know. How they got the black finish, I'm guessing it would have been during the firing process. I know some of the Southwest Indian art that's black. Oh gosh, what's her name? Maria somebody, just died about 10 years ago. Became very famous. She would polish the pots with a smooth stone, and then sheep dung would be burned in such a way that the smoke would make a black pot. And I'm guessing this doesn't seem to be a true glaze, so I'm guessing that they had a similar process. Although nobody told me in the resources that I found. So they were influenced by the archaic Greeks in the Middle East. The full flowering of Etruscan art represents a unique synthesis of existing traditions and artistic innovation. They're a lot like the Phoenicians. They traveled a lot, they were navigators, and so they would have seen things from all over the world. And consequently, those influences would be evident in their work. The cemeteries of Etruria, which is the name of the area that they settled, Etruria, were recorded in the 19th century by a man named George Dennis. Tombs cut out of rock yielded many thousands of imported black and red-figured Athenian pots, which formed the basis of many European museum collections. And then Wedgwood admired Etruscan pottery and named his ceramic works in the English pottery, he named his business Etruria, English Potteries Etruria. So that gives you a slight idea of what's going on with those pots. And I think I'm going to switch over here for a minute and talk about Etruscan Revival. Now, I don't know if the camera can get this or not. Our collection is in the company of, somebody pretty distinguished, Michael Graves. If you go to Target, you can see Michael Graves' picture frames and teapot collections, his original designs. He's quite a well-known architect, and here he is with the Greek and Etruscan collection that he has in his kitchen. And here you can see Romulus and Remus being suckled by the she-wolf. They were the founders of Rome in 753. And then, here again, I don't know if the camera can catch this or not, but anybody that wants to look at this later, there's Mr. Graves' kitchen with his little collection at the end of it. And then Etruscan pottery and decorative arts became very popular. Dot, you want to come around and hold on to that? Became very popular in the 1800s. I'm going to go back up one page. Let's get to the first page of that article. There we go.
Oh my.
And here we have a portrait by the French painter Ang. It's a countess with an Etruscan Revival bola around her neck. But the Etruscans were well known for their incredible gold work. They did what was called granulation. Tiny little pinheads of gold that were either fused or soldered individually to the gold pieces. And in the early days of Etruscan Revival jewelry, new designs were not invented. They tried to copy old pieces as closely as they could because the technique was so incredible. Whereas with neoclassical art, like with Greece and Rome, that stuff was well known. The techniques had been practiced in an unbroken tradition down through the centuries, and so the artists and designers were more freewheeling with their adaptations. Whereas early Etruscan Revival was a meticulous copy of any kind of artifacts they found. And these necklaces have bull's heads. Now the article in here says that a ram's head was more typical, and I don't know if this is going to show up on the camera or not. We can pass this around. This is Etruscan Revival from Van Buren County. Probably an 1880s cup that says, "To Charlie from Grandpa." And it's sort of reminiscent. If you look at this chart I have, you have these big looped handles on that footed Kantharos. This is sort of a cross between a Kantharos and a Cyathos or Kyathos. Sometimes these are spelled with K's and sometimes with C's, so who knows. And we can look at this stuff a little later when we're off camera. But this is a freely adapted, popular design with a little goat's head on it. Okay? Now we're going to get down to brass tacks and talk about the real stuff. So, we'll do this little Kylix, and I'm going to get this guy out of here because he likes to fall over. Why don't you go put that in the? Let's just put that in the case. We're going to put it back in the case. I don't want it to get broken. I'll just put these three pots out together. There. Okay, the one with the two handles is called a Kylix. And I also found a reference that called it a Kylix or a Kylix. So who the heck knows which one is right? But it's basically a drinking cup. And a lot of times you'll just see them called drinking cups. And these are what they drink their mixtures of water and wine from. A Kantharos is similar to that, but it has a tall foot, like this one that does not have the handle. And the one that does not have the handle, I couldn't find a reference that would tell you what kind that was. The little embossed cup, I think I've lost my sheet. If I had this on a revolving table or something, it would be a lot easier. Let's see here. There is a special name for there we go. Well, I think I got rid of it. I must have put that one away. Oh well. There's a special name for the little cup you have down here, but it has relief images of I think they're just people dancing. It might be Roman, it might be Etruscan, it's hard to say. It could be a transition piece. Okay, so those are those three pots. This is a particularly nice example, I think, very typical of what you think of as Etruscan. So we'll take a little break and move some more things in. When we talk about Greek pottery or even Etruscan pottery from this period, you talk about it in terms of the parts of the body. So the opening is the mouth, the neck is obviously the neck, the shoulder, you know what part the shoulder is. Then the main part of the vessel is the belly, and of course the base is the foot. So whenever scholars talk about the parts of a pot, it's very easy to figure out what they're talking about. Well, guess what? I found the name of that little black pot. No, I didn't. That's something else. I tell you, this is... I was really nervous about this program because pronouncing this stuff is so hard. But we'll give it a shot. This piece over here is called a hydria, and for years I've called it hydria. But hydria is the proper pronunciation according to the big fat dictionary I bought from Nell Swigard's mother. How many years ago was that, Nell? I use that every day, it seems like. Anyway, the hydria, excuse me, is a jar with a wide belly, a narrow neck, and three handles. The two horizontal handles are for lifting, and the vertical one is for pouring. It's used to store and transport water. And this particular one is said to be Etruscan. Roman pottery was not decorated. Greek and Etruscan pottery was. But it has the horizontal bands, and I'm sure a scholar could tell you more about it than I can. There's some wear on it, but it's still, the pot itself is in good shape, even though the paint is a little worn. And here again, I'm not familiar with glazing techniques. I do know that a lot of the Greek pottery was done with colored slips, with watery slurries of clay that would be painted on, and then sometimes sgraffitoed or scratched off to expose the red clay underneath. The other little piece is an excuse me, my mouth's getting dry, an amphora. And usually I think of an amphora as not having a foot and a much narrower neck with a stopper in it, because that's what you see in all those old shipwrecks, National Geographic specials. Got tons of those amphora. And we have the remains of an amphora in storage. It doesn't have a neck, and you just see just a little bit of the base of the handle on it. But I didn't know this. Amphora can have a foot, and they can be a wide mouth jar. But basically an amphora is a two-handled jar used for storing liquids such as oil and water, and solids such as grain. A neck amphora has the neck sharply set off from the body. So this would, I guess, would be considered a neck amphora, whereas the ones you see in shipwrecks don't always have that sharp distinction. Then there are other forms like the crater. We don't have a crater, A crater would be similar to this, but it would be much wider. Like if you doubled the width of this, but had that same basic profile on the outside. It was a large, deep bowl with 2 handles used for mixing wine and water. And usually the handle would scoop up and curl around and be attached on the top of the lip rather than underneath it. And I think that takes care of the Etruscan stuff. So we'll take a break and go to Rome next.
Bye.
Okay, we have here a couple of maps of the city of Rome. This one dates from the 1920s. It's one of those fold-out souvenir booklets that has the Vatican and the Pantheon and all that stuff. And then this is a little map that I got off the internet. On both of these, you can see the Tiber River. Here it is here. And this one labels the different hills, like the Esquiline Hill. Is it Palatine or Palatine? I didn't get these looked up. The Aventine Hill, and so forth. Oh, I looked them up, but it was like 6 months ago when I was first supposed to do this program, and of course I forgot. Anyhow, I'm going to attempt to show you where some of these artifacts were found. And Major Byers, in a sworn statement, said that he did see these things excavated. Now, whether or not somebody had kind of conveniently reburied something and made it look like they were being excavated is something else, because I know even 100 years ago, the tourist trade could be pretty profitable, and there were reproductions made. But you know, some of this has to be authentic. It can't all be fake. And even if it is fake, it's 100 years old, so it's close to being ancient. So what do you do? I guess since the funeral urn is here first, it's a marble burial urn with a Latin inscription that says, "Here are the ashes of Licini," or Licini, a dyer. And if you look at the lettering, what's he? He's a coloratorus. So that's kind of an interesting way to say dyer. And ossa, I suppose those are that's the bones, yeah.
He means bones.
Yep. And of course, the lid comes off, and it's heavy as blue blazes, so we won't take it off again. And it was found on the, now this is Esquiline Hill. Some of these labels are it's probably the Esquiline Hill, which is right here. Be like in this part of the city, right there. Next to it is a bust, and it was also found on the Esquiline Hill. And when you look at it in the showcase, it looks like it matches pretty well, but that head does not belong on those set of shoulders. Frequently, when a Roman emperor died, they just take one head off and put a new head on. I'm guessing this is from a later period. It doesn't have quite the features don't have quite the finesse of Roman portraiture at its zenith. It has kind of a flat quality or something, but it's still a nice little piece and interesting to look at. And it's certainly nice to have in a small museum like this. Around his shoulders are draped a skin. I think this, at first I thought it was a lion skin, but I think maybe that's like the golden fleece, Jason's golden fleece. It looks more like a lamb's head. I don't know, is there a foot on it? Is there a foot on it that looks like a lamb's foot? Maybe not.
Oh, maybe just off the left. Maybe that's what that is.
Here's the ears and the eyes and the nose and the fleece.
Over here. Oh, well,
So it probably has some mythological connotation that we're not aware of, and it would take a real scholar to tell us what was really going on. And next to that is this little head, which for my money is one of the nicest things in the case. Now, the case says it's the head of the god Hermes, which is the Greek name for the god Mercury, who is always shown clean-shaven. I'm guessing with the wreath around his head, he's more like Bacchus or somebody. That would be my guess. But it's marble, it's not fresco. Fresco is a form of painting, like the painting that was here from the Etruscan tomb. It's the pigment on wet plaster. This is a little marble head found in the Forum. And, oh, where's the Forum? Oh, let's just say it's right there. That looks like a good spot, okay? But it's not really labeled on that. I was thinking I could find a better map, and I just couldn't find one. So those are some of the Roman pieces. We have a couple of pieces in storage that are just too darn heavy to get out and too awkward, that don't have heads, but they show the iron pin that would hold the head on, and even an iron pin coming out of the shoulder socket. These were not carved all in one piece. Marble doesn't have good tensile strength, so if you had one to have an arm that was outstretched, you would carve that separately and have a nice socket for it and stick it in there, and it would be stronger than if you tried to carve it all in one piece. Later sculptors like Bernini, who did the big colonnade on either side of St. Peter's Square, he became very adept at pushing marble to its absolute extreme and did all these little delicate projections from his statues. But somebody like Michelangelo, who lived earlier than that, said the test of a good statue was you could roll it down a hill, and if nothing broke off, that it was a nice compact form. It was true to its material and could stand the test of time, as it were. So anyhow, these are some of the stone pieces from our case. So we'll take another break and look at the terracotta. We're going to finish up our program with these nice examples of Roman terracotta. Terracotta is just another word for clay. This piece, I really like this foot. It was supposedly found in the Tiber River, so that's anywhere along there, heaven only knows. I find it hard to imagine that paint would have held up so well, though, because their statues tended to be painted. We think of Greek and Roman statues as being nice white marble, but usually they were painted in kind of garish colors, so they really popped out at you. The Parthenon, for example, had bright blues and reds on it at one time. And once in a while you'll find a tomb. It seems like the tomb of Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, was discovered a few years ago, and it still retained a lot of that bright painting, which was real exciting for scholars because very, very little of that painted statuary exists. But this is an example of a painted foot, and I've liked this foot ever since I can remember. I just was always intrigued by it. But it's hollow, perhaps made in a mold. I don't know if this was a part of a statue. Maybe a peg would fit in there and the rest of the statue would be on it. I don't know what the function was. But it's kind of fascinating because the sandal is painted right on the foot.
Is it exactly a foot long?
Boy, I couldn't tell you. We'd have to look. Does it tell you in there? We measured all this stuff.
8 3/4.
8 3/4. So it wouldn't do for measuring.
That's gone, made the toes separate out.
Yeah, but it's a nice piece. Now, if this one is authentic, this is really spectacular. If it's not authentic, it's okay, but it's really a spectacular piece. This lion handle, and then the dancing figures. This kind of trefoil fluting on the lip is very nice. And you can tell if you look at it carefully that it is handmade because this is not exactly uniform on each side.
What was it used for?
It says it's a wine pitcher. I'm guessing for a very wealthy household. Supposed to have been made for Augustus Caesar. Well, I doubt that, but it's still pretty darn nice. It's quite a good piece. And I'm trying to think if I can recognize any of the figures. The face on the back, you can't see this when it's in the showcase, but there's a nice face at the base of the lion, under the lion's foot, and the way his tail is kind of curled around in front of his foot and coming down is good. And basically these are just dancers and musicians cavorting about the belly of this little pitcher.
They just had a lot to drink and they're happy.
There you go. There you go. And then finally we have these two little oil lamps. You can see the oil lamps are pierced in the middle. This is where you'd pour the oil in, and then you'd have these fiber wicks that would burn the oil. A nice impression of the goddess, well, she wasn't a goddess, I guess, Medusa's head. Oh, who killed Medusa?
Jason.
Was it Jason? Okay. Anyway, he had to look in the reflection of his polished shield that I think Athena had given him in order to deal the fatal blow, because if you looked at her in the eye, you'd turn to stone. And I'm guessing this is all mold made. You have little dolphins up here. And oh my gosh, I wonder what kind of pot that is. I'm sure it's Etruscan. It's just hard to say. But it's got those high loop handles and the voluted or ribbed body and neck. Anyway, nice piece. Double lamp, probably from an aristocratic home because it's so fancy. And then this little lamp is very nice, and I'll hold that for a while so Richard can get focused on it, because if I just have it laying down, I don't think you can see it. You see the Chi-Rho in the middle. It's the first two letters of the Greek for Christos, and then the 12 heads surrounding the Chi-Rho are the 12 apostles. And this was found in one of the catacombs under the Church of St. Sebastian, and I couldn't find where that was located, but it was along the Appian Way, and that's along in here someplace. The library or the museum commentary says that because this was found in the catacombs, it was very likely used to light the way to maybe some Christian martyr it was being buried, or certainly services that were held in memorial to those early martyrs of the faith. Some of these things were found under the baths of Diocletian, and his baths were right up here in the northeast part of the city, of the old city. And then the baths of, I always thought it was Caracalla, but my pronunciation guide says Caracalla, I can't remember. And I found that too, or rats, I can't find it now. Anyway, it's on the map someplace. I tell you, there were so many names and so many goofy pronunciations, my head was just spinning by the time I got done with this. It's exciting to have found all this out about Major Byers. I guess I'm more excited about Major Byers and his song being smuggled out in somebody's wooden leg, and the connection with Senator Wilson and all of these things. I think it brings the collection, gives me a new appreciation not only of the collection, but also of the people in the early days of Fairfield that made every effort to make this a place of learning and culture and refinement. And I think we owe a debt of gratitude to people like Byers and Senator Wilson for giving us this wonderful patrimony. So thanks for coming today, and thanks for watching FPAC. Come up to the library. I keep calling this the library, the Carnegie Historical Museum on the top floor of the old library, and take a closer look at this stuff sometime when we're open another day. And thanks for watching FPAC.